Hi guys, my name is Dante. So this is gonna be a three-part review where we will compare my main and beloved iPad Pro 2017 12.9-inch version and a 9.7 Samsung Galaxy Tab S3. We'll do a detailed comparison of these two devices purely from a digital painter perspective, which apps work best on both of these devices, making them the best digital art tools they can possibly be, look at them as an alternative or an actual full replacement for the desktop workstation for a digital painter, and of course compare them with each other. So today's episode is gonna cover all the thoughts I have on the workflow I have with my iPad Pro, comparing two apps I've chosen as the best things I can possibly use on this. The second episode is gonna be the same thing for Galaxy Tab S3, and in the third episode I'm gonna talk about the devices overall and how they compare with each other, considering all the software nuances and everything. So let's start with the iPad. I'm pretty confident that I tried pretty much every single art app worth looking at on App Store. I have a pretty big variety of them. I think I tried everything even remotely serious. And we're gonna be comparing Procreate and Artstudio Pro because I find them the best for what I do: rich rendered digital painting. Both of these apps use Metal 2 graphics API. Aside for performance, it's also very essential for battery life. I only know for sure that at least 3 big apps use Metal: Procreate, Artstudio Pro, and Affinity Photo. So let's start with the general pros that both of these apps have in their arsenal. First of all, really powerful brush engines. Both Artstudio Pro and Procreate have really impressive brush engines. They're quite different, but also have a lot of similarities. You can create really high detailed, powerful artwork with both of these brush engines. Both of these apps have really cool galleries. They're full screen galleries with the ability to organize things in folders and seeing all your projects with nice previews and quickly open them and everything. Both of them really quick and working really well. I think this is really important because on a mobile device it's not exactly easy to just open a folder with your project files and double click on it to open an app, even though it actually works, but no one's actually used to do that on iPad. You usually open the app and open the project from within it. Both of these apps have really cool features. They're not just some kind of Photoshop. These two are actual apps for drawing or painting. They have different aids for you, like perspective guides. Both of them have that. They have stabilizing of the stroke, so you won't have any wiggly lines if you're, I don't know, nervous or something. Or still not drawing from the shoulder. Draw from the shoulder, seriously, it's much easier. I will always be saying that. Another really cool feature that is, I think, iPad only kind of thing, or iOS only kind of thing, is the ability to instantly back up all of your project files from your gallery right from within your app into the iCloud drive. So even if 5 minutes after you finish your work, your iPad will drown or explode, you will have all of your work safe in a cloud, which is of course really awesome. And finally, as I mentioned, they both use Metal API, which means they support a maximum of 64 megapixel canvases. That means a square canvas 8 by 8,000 pixels, or one side can be bigger if another one is smaller. So if your smaller side is 6.4 thousand pixels, the canvas can be 10,000 pixels tall. So there's no actual cap at 8,000 pixels. You can go bigger if the overall amount of pixels on the canvas is within 64 megapixels. A special case for that goes to the third Metal app that I know, Affinity Photo. It can actually create gigantic canvases, like beyond 10 and like even 20,000 pixel canvases. But exactly after the 64 megapixel threshold, it becomes not as smoothly working and less stable. It actually crashes sometimes. But generally it's just good to have it on board to be able to, for instance, create an 8K canvas in one of these apps and then, I don't know, compose it or add some text to prepare some kind of print with a bigger resolution using Affinity Photo if you really need to. So there is no like concrete limitation there as well. So as far as both of these apps are actually best, I really find both of them useful in different situations. Procreate I mostly use for simpler sketching or drawing, even though it's really powerful and you can use it for really complex artwork. For that, for bigger paintings, I use Artstudio Pro only. Now let's go ahead and cover why I think this way about these apps and what each app has that the other one doesn't have that I can even remotely care about. So let's start with Artstudio Pro. And the first advantage that I'll start with is, of course, the brush engine, which was my main thing that made me switch to Artstudio. This app has a brush engine really close to Photoshop, with few really good improvements, of course. But the main thing for me is that it has opacity and flow control for your brush. Combined with really good blending of the texture into the brush stroke, you can create very well-adjusted brushes that any digital artist or concept artists can really appreciate. It's truly a very well tested with time legacy of Photoshop right in this app, so that's really good to have for serious work. Another cool thing is the brush presets right here. They're called favorite presets. This way you're able to save your brushes with a specific size, opacity, flow, and of course a specific tool set to be used with this brush. So just one click away, you are able to use a certain brush with your respective tool. Speaking of which, it's really cool to have the ability to use the smudge tool as a move brush the way I always do it in any app. This is kind of my own thing. I don't think a lot of artists use it. It's kind of something in the middle between the liquify and transformation. You can just move portions of your picture around without actually distorting it in any way and without the need to use any kind of selection tool and separate layers or anything. It's much faster to quickly, draftly change the proportions of your character while you're building up or anything. And in Procreate, you actually can't use that kind of brush because there's some kind of optimization that lowers the resolution of the image that's being moved around, and that just doesn't work. And speaking of Procreate, there's also no ability to use opacity plus flow in one brush at the same time, at least for now. Another advantage of Artstudio Pro is liquify, or so-called elastify. And what I love about it is that it's really well done right away. It's very high performance, and Jeremy is very happy about that. It has a lot of cool tools that will cover any kind of distortion that you can possibly need, including the smoothing and removing of the distortion and everything. Wow, that looks so cool. But yeah, liquify is a very useful tool that everyone uses, I think, every now and then, especially with big projects. You really find it useful. But I have to mention, this feature is actually coming to Procreate in the next big update. That is coming vaguely soon. I don't know exactly when, but back to Artstudio Advantages, you can change the canvas size. Which is kind of ridiculous that Procreate can't do it, considering how much of a powerful app it is. In Artstudio, you can resize the image, resize the canvas, you have the crop tool, you can change your document any way you want, exactly the way you would do on desktop. No limitations, all kinds of flexibility there, really useful. No way to do that in Procreate. You can create a document of any resolution and proportion, but if you decide to change the proportions later, you will have to create a separate document and copy all the layers to the new document. It's just really messy. It's weird. Another thing that is absent in Procreate is the type tool. You can't create any text in Procreate. And in Artstudio Pro, there are all kinds of ways to do that, with a cool support of your actual keyboard and a whole bunch of fonts, an actual text box, and of course you're able to transform it afterwards. And to continue with Artstudio Advantages, you can also apply the layer effect on it, adding shadows, stroke, bevel, or any kind of stuff your crazy client wants. Also, you can rasterize your text layer. And speaking of layers, there's also adjustment layers, so you can use not only a pretty huge, impressive variety of color correction filters, but you can do those in real time in separate layers, changing their order, opacity, changing their settings as much as you want. So this is obviously too strong, I'm just gonna tone it down and maybe add some other stuff like temperature. Let's make it colder or warmer. Yeah, warmer. So now we have two layers and they're gonna be adjusting our gamma in real time. Awesome sauce, just like in Photoshop. And continuing with layers advantages, there's also clip masking. So we can make these adjustment layers only affect the Jeremy and the table that he's sitting at, and just paint around within his transparency boundaries and transform and everything. And clip masking is also absent in Procreate at the moment. And yes, speaking of filters, there is a huge variety of them, pretty much repeating the whole gallery of filters from Photoshop. You have all kinds of stuff in here. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with most of these. I really like the fact that it has radial blur, which is something that Procreate doesn't have. And in the adjust menu, there's also a huge variety of adjustment features, including really cool stuff like shadow and highlights that allows you to quickly make the shadows of your picture less strong or more strong if you want to. A very good feature to quickly fix some issues with values or something. Plus some basic stuff like invert, for instance. You want to have that kind of stuff in your arsenal when you're going to work on something really big. Now, another thing that I really appreciate in a good drawing app is the selection features. Specifically, I really like Lasso tool. Procreate also has it, but what's really cool in Artstudio Pro is that it has feather. You can create your selection and have it smooth right away, which is really helpful and time saving. If you're moving a portion of your picture, you won't waste time erasing the sharp edges of your selection afterwards. It's just smooth right away. And beside that, in the select tab, there's the ability to make a higher contrast of your selection, expand it, smooth it even more, blur it, create a border out of it, just the way Photoshop has all these features as well. Now, another helpful thing in Artstudio Pro is symmetry. You can apply it in the settings of your tool. It can be horizontal or vertical, and it has all the necessary essential settings for it. And there you go, you're creating some kind of illustration that is symmetrical. I don't think Procreate has it. And another cool thing that Artstudio has that I actually have on in the full view mode is the rulers on the edges of the screen and the ability to add the guides like that. It's really helpful, for instance, when I'm working on these pages for Outlandish Curiosity book. It really helps to see where the horizon line is and where the middle between the two pages is, because there shouldn't be any important details in that area, and the guides are the perfect way to show that without like standing in the way. If that would be some kind of sketch on top, it would be gross and darkening. This way it's really cool to have lines, and sometimes you just want to memorize the boundaries of some smaller composition that you're working on if you're doing some storyboarding or whatever. A really good tool for professional work. And one last advantage of Artstudio Pro comparing to Procreate that I can think of right now, you get all of your project files from the gallery of Artstudio Pro visible in the file manager of iOS. In this case, I'm using iCloud to backup everything, and as you can see, right here we have all of these documents from the gallery from the left visible in the actual file manager of the system. So I can rename, delete, duplicate, or move the document just using the files right here in the system, just the way you would do on a desktop with PSD files instead of doing changes from within Photoshop. And Procreate doesn't have it. Procreate uses iCloud backup and it has its own folder, but this folder is empty. It's only used to drop some textures in it or whatever files you want to work with later, but the actual documents from within the gallery of the app, they're invisible. They're inside of the mind palace of the Procreate. You can't actually access the files themselves. Alright, now moving on to Procreate Advantages. And I'll start with the most important ones. These are the things that make me still use Procreate, even though I really like Artstudio. And I would love to only use Artstudio, but I keep coming back because of these few features. Number one is palm rejection. Procreate has this algorithm that will never let the app recognize your palm as anything else. There will never be a random undo, redo, or picking the color from the canvas or anything. It's just perfect. The developers obviously used their own extra filtering on top of the basic palm rejection of the operating system, and Artstudio Pro is using only the basic iOS palm rejection, so it works like 98% of the times, but those 2% are enough to make you feel very unconfident about touching the screen, which is not very pleasant, which resulted in me turning off the gestures for undo and redo. I only use buttons now, and lately I even use the actually cool feature of Artstudio to be able to pick up colors, not with the finger, but with the actual pencil by just clicking and holding in one place. I like it much more because you don't have to lift your hand and like lift your pencil away, and you just can keep on drawing right away. But yeah, could use a much better palm rejection algorithm for Artstudio Pro. Another really powerful advantage of Procreate is what I can only call a non-intrusive document saving. I can't even call it a background auto-saving because I don't even know if it does auto-saving or it just has an instant saving of any change that I make to the document. I've never seen the document saving at all. There is no button to save the document. Whatever you do with the document, it will just be that. Even if the app crashes, it's just gonna be that. So there is no interruptions ever. When you work in Artstudio Pro, every defined by you number of minutes, you will be interrupted by the whole screen getting darker and the message will be saying auto-saving for 5 seconds. In Procreate, you really feel much more like you can just dive into the process much better without these interruptions. Really big deal, I really like that. Now, speaking about the brush engine, as I said, I don't like the fact that it doesn't have the good opacity plus flow combination in one brush, but what it does have is what I can call an innovative feature, because this is something that I've never seen in any, at least like a big serious art program. It all comes down to this one slider right here, which is called movement. This is the main thing that changes a lot. It's kind of weird, but it's really a huge deal. All these brushes that have very realistic brush strokes that don't look like anything digital, just repetitive pattern placement or anything, it only works this way because you are able to stretch any kind of texture, for instance, like this grain source texture of some kind of mucus. You can stretch it along the direction of your stroke. After experimenting with a certain size, with a certain movement amount, and a certain type of grain texture, you can create really cool, realistic effect of this messy, wet paint actually dragged around in a very unpredictable way. It's really cool and interesting looking. Not super useful for a very high detailed painting, but for a lot of other art styles, it's really cool to have such organic looking, expressive brushstrokes. Really, I seriously tried to replicate an average realistic brush from Procreate and Artstudio Pro, and I got this kind of stuff. You see, it's actually lacking this ability to create this messy movement effect. Man, I'm still so impressed by iPad Pro being so powerful. I can paint in 2 different massive apps at the same time. It's really cool. I'm recording from the screen at the same time, by the way. But anyway, you can have this blending and painting at the same time with different pressure. So generally, you also have the ability to create realistic wet paint brushes with this mixer tool, or wet paint it's called here. But yeah, just this one movement feature is making quite the difference in the appearance of the brushstroke. Who would have thunk? And the next advantage of Procreate that I will talk about, that I think played a huge role in the success of Procreate, is the way the brushes are presented. Just look at this set of brushes. It's so easy to access them. They're in such obvious, well done, segregated folders, and they're all very well done presets, which is really important. I know many artists, even quite professional artists, have no idea how to create their own brushes. They just deal with whatever the app has, and Procreate just has it right on the nose that it has the most awesome set of really cool brushes. In Artstudio Pro is much harder to find things, and because there's also a set of these brush presets that I mentioned before as an advantage, it actually makes the whole brush collection split into two different sets that are being opened in different places in the app. It's kind of messy and it's hard to open it, and you have to split the space for the selection of the brushes with the settings of the brushes. It's hard to switch between the folders of the brushes. It's really messy. And in here is just so clean and obvious. You just tap on the brush and you can change the settings, then you go back and here you go, back in the brush selection. And continuing with the whole idea of the smooth and clean interface, an obvious Procreate's advantage is just the fact of how smooth it is. Everything is perfectly smooth, starting with just the way you navigate the gallery. Everything is just jumping around so quickly. All the previews are always here, they don't load. Nothing ever loads and nothing ever saves as well. It's just there. Whenever I open an old project, it opens up right away showing fuzzy preview, but I already can look at what I'm gonna deal with for like half a second while it's opening the actual document, so it's not standing in a way at all. When I'm opening a project in Artstudio, I'm actually looking at the loading animation in the middle of the screen. I don't see anything, and it's like a very different experience. It's not that seamless at all. Another really cool advantage of Procreate for now is the quick menu. I love the way to use it with the most quick gesture ever, when you're just tap and move your finger right away. This way you can just tap in the direction you need and do the command right away. So for instance, I know in my Procreate, to mirror the canvas, I have to do the gesture to upper left. So I just go ahead and do that and it just rotates immediately. But as I said, this is an advantage of Procreate for now, because I know that quick menu comes to Artstudio Pro in the next big update, so look forward to that. Another really cool advantage of Procreate is hiding in its actual lasso tool that I criticized before for the absence of feather feature for it, so you can only select a sharp shape. But what it actually has much better than Artstudio is the fact that to end the selection, you have to tap the beginning circle over there. So before I tap it, I can release in the middle of selection, and it won't automatically end it. I'm still in the process of selection. So then I can just continue doing it and go grab a cup of joe and then continue selecting. You know, if you're creating a very complex selection with moving the canvas around, it's really useful to be able to release the pen or the finger from the canvas while you do that. But also it adds a really cool feature that when I realized it, I fell in love with this. If you just tap, you can create straight lines for your selection. So it's combining the freehand lasso with the straight line lasso together, the way you can do in Photoshop if you are a ninja with the hotkeys, because not a lot of people know how to do that. And in Artstudio Pro, there is no such trick with keyboard shortcuts or with the interface, so we lack that feature at all in there. You can either go with the straight line lasso or with the freehand lasso. No way to combine it together. Oh, and one thing that I really love, let me show ya. There's an actual drag and drop into layer in Procreate, which is so cool. This makes the whole thing so much like a desktop experience. So here we have, I'm in my iCloud drive, so this folder, or not even an iCloud, let's go to Google Drive to prove a point of how awesome this is. So let's go ahead, it doesn't show all the previews, but anyway, let's grab this Pun Pun avatar and drag it right here. And here we have it right in the layer, in the new layer, ready to transform it and put whatever we want. How awesome is that? You can drop all kinds of references and everything to color pick from them and show them whenever you want right inside of the layer without any kind of mess. In Artstudio Pro, when you're trying to do this kind of drag and drop, it works with it, it reacts to it, but it will open this new image as a separate document. And after that, you can copy and paste into your initial artwork. But if you need to like import 12 different references, you will have to create 12 different projects in your Artstudio gallery in order to just place them into and then go ahead and delete all of them from the gallery. It's kind of messy, you know? There's no way to import new pictures into the document. And yeah, if you want to actually import the picture as a separate document, you go ahead and do that into the gallery, which totally makes sense. Alright, and the final advantage of Procreate, it's actually in its blur effects. Even though it has a smaller selection of different filters and effects, as you can see right here, this is all you get. But all of the blur effects are incredibly fast. They actually work the way they work in the latest versions of Photoshop, where they introduced the blur gallery that supports OpenGL acceleration, so it's super fast. And Artstudio Pro blurring filters actually work the way the old blur in Photoshop works. So yeah, I guess this is pretty much it for the differences between these apps for me personally. Now I want to cover a couple of cons that both of these apps have, and the whole iPad environment would really improve for artists if both these apps would have these features. So number one, of course, if you know me, it's always gonna be the absence of customizable keyboard shortcuts. Both developers really don't see this as a very important feature at the moment for an iPad app. I guess maybe it's coming in the next update, I don't know. But right now there's a very narrow selection of hotkeys. I mean, it's not exactly narrow, there's a lot of stuff, but certain things are definitely absent if you directly compare it to any desktop drawing app. In Procreate it's noticeably smaller, by the way. And of course the fact that you can't set up your own custom hotkeys is really standing in the way of these apps becoming a complete replacement for desktop software. And together with the absence of custom shortcuts, another important downside is the fact that the interface of both of these apps is exclusively drop-down kind of interface. To access the color box, you have to tap, it will appear, you select the color, then you start painting, and the color box disappears from the screen. The same thing happens in Artstudio Pro. You select the color, you start painting, it's all gone. Same for the selection of layers. You select a layer, you start painting, gone. The inability to have the color box on the screen all the time really slows you down when you're working on the details of your painting, adding higher contrast of shadows, for instance, when you want to pick up the color and then make it darker, more saturated. So every time you do that, you have to reach for the very edge of your screen to summon the color box and do this movement, instead of just quickly move it around right away, maybe with a second hand even or something. And the layer panel, the fact that it doesn't stay on the screen, combined with the fact that there's no customizable keyboard shortcuts, is one of the biggest reasons why I can't drop Photoshop from my life completely. To do a really decent, complex, multiple layer artwork, you need to be able to quickly create selections, manipulate them, move them around, apply them, duplicate layers, merge them down, and stuff like that. You have to have your layers, your selections, and transform tools at your fingertips. For that you need custom shortcuts. But also, we all know when you're doing any manipulations to the layers, you have to see them. There's no point in a quick and slick shortcut for duplicating layer or merging it down without seeing what I'm doing to the layers. Because every time I'm using this shortcut, I will still have to reach for that layers panel to look at what I've done. And it defeats the whole purpose of the shortcut, because now I could just, you know, do the same thing right here. Who cares? There's no point in a shortcut if you can't see what you've done with it. So that kind of stuff, little nuances, little details that would really be aimed for a very fast professional work, they're still a little bit absent from these apps, but you definitely can live with this. I know for a fact I can, because I've been working on this device with these two apps for almost 6 months now, I think. think, and it really works out. I may be slower at some areas, but I'm also faster at some other stuff. It's hard to tell, but it's definitely better to work on this device than it was on my Wacom Companion 2, the heavy, noisy, and weird thing with unreasonably wide display. So yeah, this is it, the conclusion. Procreate is an incredibly impressive, very satisfying to work with app. It feels very light yet powerful, and it's kind of their smart way of tricking you as well, because the app seems really powerful because initially it doesn't feel like it has a lot to it due to the very minimalistic interface, and then you find out stuff like you can do stuff to the layer with tapping with 2 fingers on it or something. Oh my god, you know? It's really impressive to uncover stuff from where you don't expect it. Procreate is impressive, but it's not as powerful as Artstudio for actual professional work. It's made much more for everyone and not as much for professionals. Procreate is made for professionals, but Artstudio Pro is made much more for professionals. And Artstudio is doing a great job at their obvious goal of bringing Photoshop to iOS. It has much more features while sacrificing certain minimalism and cleanliness of the interface, which to my opinion is a perfectly good thing considering the size of the display of the iPad Pro. But of course, with the abundance of drop-down menus, kind of like old school situation, you really need the alternative old school access to all these features, which is customizable shortcuts, of course. So yeah, this is it. Both apps are growing very rapidly and will completely replace desktop art apps in a year or so. I'm pretty confident about that. Depends on when the whole shortcut feature will be added, because I think this will be the last step they will take. So yeah, this is it for my overview of my iPad Pro workflow. Tell me guys what you think. Do you agree with my opinion on both apps? Did I miss anything? Did I not do enough justice to one of the apps? Did I say something wrong about any features? Please let me know in the comments. Look forward for the second part of this, where we'll talk about Galaxy Tab S3 and compare its 2 best apps that I chose. But for now, I thank you for watching. If you did, I guess you did. If you're here, leave a like and subscribe. Tell a friend. Zoom in. Oh my god, I can zoom in and both things at the same time. How cool is that? Do whatever you want. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. I think these 2 pictures really represent the way I approach both of these apps. Procreate has these awesome brush strokes, and I really take advantage of those. And Artstudio Pro is for hardcore, highly detailed artwork.